Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today I'm looking at a video put out by World Video Bible School asking the question, do creation scientists publish research? I am fully expecting the answer to be something along the lines of, they do research, but the journals refuse to publish anything that supports creationism, or something like that. I'm also sure at some point he's going to bring up creationist journals like the Answers Research Journal, which actually explicitly state that they are working with a goal of ensuring that the creation and flood model is given the best possible development, and in their explanation of the paper peer review process, they explicitly state several times that all papers must support young Earth creation, or if they support old Earth creation, heaven forbid, they must provide a possible young Earth alternative. They also must interpret the Bible in the same way as Answers in Genesis, and they must not conflict with AIG's statement of faith, which explicitly states in several places that they start with the conclusion that Genesis is literal, evolution is wrong, the flood of Noah was literal and global, and all the assertions in the Bible are factually true, and other such nonsense. Now, if we look at the publication guidelines for a reputable journal like Scientific Reports, I was actually surprised to see guidelines that are specific to what content would be in the papers that they are considering. But on reading further, my surprise was really unwarranted. It is just explicitly laying out the fact that papers need to adhere to certain ethical standards or they won't be published. So, for instance, if you conduct an experiment involving the transplant of human tissue or organs, they won't even consider your paper for publication if you use tissues or organs obtained from prisoners, for what I would hope are obvious reasons. So it looks like the only content restrictions on this journal are related to ethical violations, not which conclusions your paper draws. But I may be off topic. Let's see what Mr. Butt has to say on the matter.
Creation and peer-reviewed journals. You see, scientists who teach that an intelligent designer created the universe, they're often ridiculed by the evolutionary community.
That depends on what you mean by an intelligent designer and on how you present your ideas of this intelligent designer. You see, many scientists have religious views of one kind or another, whether they be Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, or whatever other religion you care to think of. And most religions have, at their core, a belief that some sort of divine being created the universe. And yet, these scientists are still able to publish in reputable journals. I would suggest that anyone who believes the universe was created by an intelligent being believes in intelligent design, and a slim majority of scientists fall into this category, though thanks to the work of the Discovery Institute, I imagine most of them would cringe at my including them in the intelligent design category, as the Discovery Institute largely pushes a young Earth anti-evolution creationist narrative, which is not a view shared by the majority of scientists. But there's also a false dichotomy that you set up here. You say that scientists that believe in an intelligent designer are ridiculed by the evolutionary community. But there are plenty of scientists out there who believe in some kind of intelligent designer, and also fully accept the science backing up the theory of evolution. Notably, people like Francis Collins, the founder of BioLogos, the Christian organization that explicitly states on their website that they believe that God created the universe, the earth, and all life, and whose mission statement it is to help the world see the harmony between science and biblical faith. And yet, this man who would fully agree that the universe and life are both intelligently designed has not only successfully published research, but has published research so groundbreaking that his name will go down in history. He oversaw the Human Genome Project. He developed positional cloning, a powerful tool in molecular genetics. He helped identify the genes responsible for cystic fibrosis, Huntington's disease, neurofibromatosis, and several others. He has been the director of the National Institutes of Health since 2009. The fact that anyone could look at someone like Francis Collins and still claim that the scientific community, specifically the evolutionary community, ridicule anyone who believes in a designer is just preposterous.
This ridicule comes in many different forms, but one of the most often used tactics of the atheistic community.
You are doing an awful lot of equivocating here. Is it the evolutionary community, the scientific community, or the atheistic community? Because these are three separate things, at least two of which a lot of people would argue don't even exist. But if they did exist, there would be overlap, sure, but they are not even close to being the same thing. Do you think that Francis Collins would appreciate you lumping him in with the atheists? Collins and I pretty much agree on the science, that evolution happens, so our Venn diagrams overlap there, but not at the atheist part.
Is to claim that creation science is simply not good science.
Yeah. Creationism, specifically the young earth anti-science version promoted by the World Video Bible School and Kyle Butt here, had its time in the spotlight, and as we learned more about how the world works, it became increasingly obvious that the commonly accepted explanations put forth by creationists, things like the global flood, were not actually even physically possible. So at this point in history, these ideas are rightly considered not scientific.
As evidence that creation or intelligent design is not good science, atheistic evolutionists exult in the fact that the standard peer-reviewed scientific journals don't publish papers that support intelligent design.
Right, because the standard peer-reviewed scientific journals are more concerned with publishing accurate information than with pandering to a group of fundamentalist science deniers clinging to ideas that were fully debunked over a century ago.
One atheistic scientist put it this way, quote, "Most telling, perhaps, is intelligent design's near total failure to make any headway in the peer-reviewed publications that are the gateway to scientific success." End quote.
Yes, J.D. Wexler did say that. And while Wexler has published studies, notably his statistical determination of which Supreme Court justices are the funniest based on how many times they induce laughter per oral argument attended, he's more of a legal scholar than a scientist. Still, irregardless of whether you consider a legal scholar to be a scientist, that is an accurate point. At the moment, anyone proposing a young earth or intelligent design are either relying on a lack of knowledge in a specific area to prove their point, which includes invalidating a plethora of areas where we do not lack knowledge, or they must invoke the supernatural as a mechanism to explain away the details that we currently do have a naturalistic explanation for. Saying we don't have an answer for this one very specific thing over here does not automatically make all the answers we do have incorrect, and invoking the supernatural as an explanation as to why all of our natural explanations are wrong is akin to saying it was magic. Both of these angles are rightly rejected from reputable peer-reviewed publications, whether they be about creation or anything else. Hell, going back to the publication guidelines for scientific reports, they actually had a section on alternative medicine where they explicitly lay out the guidelines that will allow alternative medical treatment to actually get published. Now, of course, it basically amounts to we'll hold them to the same standards as actual medicine, but I'm pretty sure that that section is there so that they can lend some transparency to the process, which explains why most alt-med studies don't get published. Because usually when you hold alternative treatments to the same requirements as standard treatments, it becomes pretty obvious why the alternative treatments are alternative rather than standard. So here we actually have a journal agreeing that they will publish studies that support something that is largely thought by the scientific community to be bunk, but they will be subject to the same amount of rigor and scrutiny as the non-alternative treatments, explicitly spelling out what they have to do to get published. It's the same with creationism. If you can provide evidence that supports creationism and meets the same rigorous standards as all the other scientific papers have to meet, then it'll get published. The problem is that creationists want to be able to propose literal magic as an explanation for things and still be taken seriously by the scientific community.
The reasoning here is that if creation or intelligent design were scientific, then it would be included in peer-reviewed journals.
I mean, that's not the reason that it's not scientific, but it is certainly a very big red flag.
But since it's not in peer-reviewed journals, then it must not be scientific.
Again, not necessarily. There are some non-scientific ideas that do make their way into peer review. The process isn't perfect by any means, it's just the best that we have at the moment. After all, acupuncture doesn't work. There is no mechanism by which it can work. Studies that actually show an effect often rely on a bait and switch, using a method for pain relief other than acupuncture, but using the acupuncture needles as the delivery mechanism for that method, and then claiming it was the acupuncture, such as the use of transcutaneous electrical stimulation. And yet, 99% of clinical trials published in China found a positive effect. If acupuncture actually did work, you'd still expect there to be at least 5 to 10% of trials finding a negative result just as a result of statistical anomalies. Obviously, this is a problem and it needs to be fixed. But my point is that just passing peer review does not necessarily make an idea scientific. It certainly is one of the steps along the way, and it is a significant one at that, but it is not the be-all and end-all.
Let's look at the problem with this reasoning. The fact is, this reasoning is a circular process.
Not really. It's more of an indicator. Not being published in peer-reviewed journals does not, in and of itself, make an idea unscientific. But if it's an idea that has been around for centuries, as young Earth creationism has, then it is certainly a red flag if they can't get their idea into any reputable journal. Back to acupuncture, it doesn't work. There is no qi flowing through the body that causes diseases which can be manipulated with poking needles at meridians. In fact, when looking into whether or not professional acupuncturists could even find these meridians, it was found that there was basically no agreement on where they are between acupuncturists. And yet, as recently as 2019, in Science Advances, a group of scientists published a paper studying the effects of acupuncture on alcohol withdrawal and reported positive results. So, acupuncture, a thoroughly debunked and definitely unscientific idea, still manages to get papers published that suggest positive results. What does that say for creationism? If something as silly as acupuncture can still get studies published, then why can't creationists? Lack of publication is a huge red flag.
By which papers are accepted for inclusion in such journals based on the absence of creation in those papers.
That statement makes it sound like any old paper will be accepted as long as it doesn't reference creationism, which is just flat out not true. Every scientist, every single one, has had papers rejected for publication. In fact, as many as half of all papers are rejected by the editor before they even go out for peer review. The reasons can be quite varied, everything from not finding a big enough effect, to not presenting a novel enough idea, to having too small a dataset, to presenting your data in the wrong way, to problems with your methodology, to just plain bad writing, and more. There are a plethora of reasons why papers can fail to pass peer review, not just whether or not they contain creation arguments. In fact, in the case of creation arguments, it's not so much about making sure that creation stays out of the journals, but rather it's that creation has had its chance, and the scientific consensus has moved on to a point where the demonstration of the accuracy of any one creation claim would require a corresponding demonstration of the falsehood of so many other fields of science that it's basically impossible for any one paper to achieve. And I think that creationists know this. That's why when dealing with creationist arguments, you never see any actual arguments that support the idea of a young Earth. All of their arguments are either philosophical arguments for God, or rely entirely on trying to poke holes in other well-established fields of science. Because they know that before they can even begin to present a positive case for creationism, they must first dismantle basically all of modern biology, geology, cosmology, astronomy, and more.
The scientists in authoritative positions have established their own preconceived definition for science.
Well, according to sciencecouncil.org, science is the pursuit and application of knowledge and understanding of the natural and social world following a systematic methodology based on evidence. There is a bit about peer review as part of their definition of scientific methodology, but why would you expect to be able to skip that step? If you have everything else on that list backing up your position, then passing peer review should be a cinch.
Such scientists say this: to be scientific in our era is to search for solely natural explanations.
Yes, that's called methodological naturalism, and it is not the same thing as philosophical naturalism. There is a difference between these two positions. Francis Collins, for instance, is a methodological naturalist, but is not a philosophical naturalist. Why? His personal beliefs include a belief in the supernatural, but he recognizes that supernatural explanations are useless in a scientific setting, so when he does science, he looks for natural explanations for things, and as a result, he is personally responsible for several significant advances in the field of genetics. When you write a paper, as creationist geologist John Baumgartner did, explaining why your conclusion is physically impossible but happened anyways, and you speculate that the laws of physics changed without providing a mechanism or explanation or evidence for these changes other than an appeal to God, that absolutely should not pass peer review. To help you understand why, keep in mind that this would basically open the door for wild speculation of all varieties to enter the scientific literature. This is the same problem that is introduced with the separation of church and state. When a Christian organization wants to put up a display on public property, they don't usually realize that the government cannot legally promote one religion over another, and so as soon as the government allows such a display, they are now obligated to allow similar displays from other religions. That's when the Satanic Temple shows up with their Baphomet statue. It's the same thing here. If science journals lowered their standards to a point where they could include papers that appeal to a god whose existence has not been demonstrated as a mechanism for a drastic alteration of the laws of physics, then they are also opening up the door to publications of papers from all other pseudosciences, like Flat Earth, as long as they also are appealing to some unexplained supernatural mechanism. And fun fact, most Flat Earthers will have the same supernatural mechanism as creationists, the God of the Bible. What causes gravity? The flat Earth is constantly accelerated upward at 9.8 meters per second squared. What causes this acceleration? God, QED. Will he actually explain why creationism should be considered scientific, or will he just continue to complain about how we hold creationism to the same standards as everyone else? To find out, tune in tomorrow. Same Rhino time, same Rhino channel. Still, irregardless of whether you consider a legal scholar to be a scientist, that is... The word irregardless is throwing me off. Shouldn't use that word, but I did. Just to bug people. Ha.